Hi, I'm Iman.
And I'm Harriet.
And this is Trial and Error Law. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at The Little Mermaid. Very interesting perspective for today's one.
Yeah, sorry in advance.
I feel like we should put a disclaimer in at this point. Disclaimer, trigger warning is like prostitution, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose.
Which is...
trafficking.
It'll make
immigration.
It'll make more sense.
Yeah,
as we get into this podcast episode. But if you couldn't tell already, today's episode
is gonna be a bit mad.
I'm talking about the actual themes of today's episode.
Okay.
The question we have overall is Ariel an illegal immigrant?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so we should just get into it.
Yeah. Right. The first main point we want to discuss is the contract between Ursula and Ariel legally binding.
Straight off the bat, we're going to go with just no. Ariel, as far as we're aware, according to our very official source
16.
of the Disney fandom wiki, Ariel is only 16 years old. Yeah. She's a minor. She can't sign a contract. It's not legally binding.
And we know, we assume that no one co-signed on her behalf. Yeah. It didn't show that on the
no one else knew about it. And also, but the problem we're having is towards the end of the film, Ursula literally says, like, King Triton is literally trying to blast the contract apart. She's like, it's legally binding. You can't destroy it.
Yeah.
So maybe according to the rules of this kingdom, Atlantica of mermaids, the contract's legally binding. But we're going to sort of break that down in terms of how this is actually a form of exploitation.
Yeah.
As far as we're aware. And although it's quite a shock to say that Ariel is being pimped out by Ursula, we've kind of come to the conclusion that that's what's happening.
Yeah. Maybe more trafficked than pimped out. I feel like that might be a better term.
That's probably a more official term, but pimped out is more fun.
Yeah. So first, do you want to outline what the contract was saying, as that links quite well to this?
Okay, so what the contract says, essentially, is that Ariel has to give up her voice and just basically seduce the prince into kissing her. Like, the prince has to kiss her before a certain time. Yeah. Otherwise, she gets turned into a shrew, basically, into, like, this little, like, emaciated worm thing.
Yeah.
That like with all the other people that couldn't keep to Ursula's contracts. So we're arguing that that's an abuse of power, really. So we have a definition of trafficking up here. This is from the Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking Offences and Defences, including the Section 45 defence from the Crown Prosecution Service, going off of the Palermo Protocol from the UN, which says that trafficking persons shall mean the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of abuse of power of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control of another person for the purpose of exploitation. And exploitation shall include, at a minimum, the exploitation of the prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labour or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or removal of organs.
Right. If we start at the beginning of this, Ariel is in a position of vulnerability. She's under 18.
She's a minor.
Yeah, so she is inherently vulnerable.
She doesn't fully understand the nature of the situation that she's going into. She just really wants a pair of legs.
Yeah, and in that same point, Ursula is then abusing her power as an adult.
And I think we can argue deception. I think Ursula and fraud. I mean, at this point, I think Ursula's very much aware that she's going to be doing everything she can to stop the contract being fulfilled. Yeah. And I know that's not in the terms of contract, but I feel like that's some kind of meddling.
It has to be, yeah.
And she's definitely coercive and deceptive. She's sort of not being outright.
Yeah, she's deceptive as well in the sense that it's clear that Ariel didn't fully understand the contract. And they were always being coerced into what Ursula wanted her to do.
And eventually she uses that contract against Triton to turn him into a little emaciated, like, desiccated worm thing. Yeah. And that's exploitation. She sort of uses the contract as a form of exploitation of somebody that hadn't even signed the contract. Yeah. Which is, like, there's so much, there's a lot going on there. There was a lot to unpack in that.
And then when it talks about the exploitation of the prostitution of others, or other forms of sexual exploitation, she basically forces Ariel to kiss the prince.
And that's like...
It is sexual exploitation.
It's a certain level of intimacy there that is exploited. She doesn't really have it. She kind of has to do that now, whether or not she feels comfortable already. And I mean, she also, we didn't actually discuss this, but when Ursula herself turns into a human, she, like, enchants Eric into, like, kissing her and getting married. Yeah. And I feel like that's a form of exploitation as well. So,
I feel like she's probably not trafficking Eric.
No, she's not trafficking Eric.
But that just as a separate point.
As a separate point.
She is exploiting Eric.
There's definitely a lot of exploitation.
Yeah, she's coercing him and using her position of power or just her general powers to do that.
And now that is established, I feel like our overall theme for today is immigration.
Yeah. There is one more point I'd like to go back to that we debated on this. Back to the human trafficking. It says the servitude or removal of organs. Now, your larynx, which is your voice box, is an organ. It was never established in the film whether her magic removed the larynx from Ariel or if she just went through other means. But I think we said if we go with the assumption that her larynx was removed, she removed her organ.
So that's another form of exploitation there. Yeah. It's a bit of a push on that one. Because obviously we're dealing with a world in which witches and mermaids exist.
But if that was happening in real life, the only way, one of the likely ways they could force her to be mute is removing the larynx. That was kind of our thought process.
Yeah. So... that's an interesting one. Dealing with the magic systems in these films... It's sometimes
quite hard to relate it back to UK law.
We have to make some sort of exceptions. Yeah. And I think you'll find that a bit later on when we discuss another theme, that we've had to make some exceptions. But, you know, we're going to go with it for the purposes of the podcast.
Also relating to body parts, actually. This one more than legs, but
because mermaids don't exist.
Yeah,
essentially, because mermaids don't exist is the sticking point here. But we're gonna move on more to the immigration side of things. So we read an interesting article. Well, it was an article. It was a chapter from the book, and the book was called Designing Prostitution Policy: Intention and Reality in Regulating the Sex Trade by Wagner, Armsberger and Alting. We apologise for any pronunciation.
Awful pronunciation.
But the chapter in question is Understanding the Policy Field, Migration, Prostitution, Trafficking and Exploitation. And what we learn here is that, so it defines pimping as the abuse of dependency relations often enforced by violence, threats of violence, sexual exploitation, and is in fact a criminal activity. So we're arguing here that Ursula is a criminal. Yeah. She's a pimp because there is a dependency relation, and the dependency that we've identified here is with regards to migration. Yeah. Because Ursula has to provide Ariel with the means to be able to migrate from Atlantica to the unnamed kingdom that we're assuming runs loosely on laws similar to those that we have here in the UK. Yeah. But then Ursula is that third party that's facilitating this migration from Atlantica to Eric's kingdom. Yeah. So, and whilst you could argue that there was intent to go to the human world, I mean, we have that whole song sequence where Ariel's like, I want to be up there. But we also...
Yeah, in the end, it was Ursula that facilitated that and made that happen. We don't know. Well, we can assume that Ariel wouldn't have done that without Ursula, because she wouldn't have had the capabilities.
She wouldn't have had the means to. So there's a dependency clause there. So whether or not Ariel is actually responsible for being an illegal immigrant, in that sense, we're not entirely sure. But according to the United Nations protocol, again the Palermo protocol, it states that the consent of the victim is irrelevant where illicit means are established, and the previous chapter has made clear that what Ursula is doing by abusing that dependency clause is in fact a form of criminal activity. So whether or not Ariel wanted to go to the human world is irrelevant.
Yeah, that it doesn't really matter because it wasn't in the end her going through her own will.
Criminal activity is involved. So
yeah, I mean, we've already discussed the fact that she was exploited. There is a clear threat of violence. She threatens to turn her into
an emaciated, desiccated worm.
Yeah. It's clear threat of violence.
But also, so what we're trying to discover then, or what we've been trying to uncover through that is, does that mean that Ariel's an illegal immigrant in that sense?
Yeah.
If she is being trafficked, and what we learn also from the Palermo Protocol is that it contains a series of, this is a quote, of general protection and support measures for victims, and this includes the opportunity for victims to obtain legal status, allowing them to remain in the country of the receiving party either temporarily or permanently. So I would argue that in that sense, Ariel isn't an illegal immigrant.
Yeah, no. You see, I'd agree with you that she's not a legal immigrant. Yeah, just a sec, let me get to my point here. I can't remember what I was going to say. Yeah, I'd say she's not an illegal immigrant because it's not her fault that she's in that situation. She wasn't intentionally there, and therefore we went on to discuss how that could qualify her as an asylum seeker.
And I think the Palermo Protocol tells us that you know, because she's potentially a victim of trafficking, she would be given the opportunity to apply for, so like, you know, not necessarily a visa, but permission to stay in Eric's kingdom. And I think actually we could also transition into one of our other points, which is that Eric is...
Yeah, he is... There's no mention of any parliament or anything of that sort.
I mean, it's implied that he's not king yet, so he's not reigning monarch, but he
still has power.
He's a working royal.
Yeah.
Significant degree of power, and
so
I feel like...
Did he have the power to basically grant her what we'd say is a visa?
Or even citizenship, I think, because she does marry him.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I'd argue that implicitly maybe Ariel actually does end up, because the events of this film happen really quickly.
Yeah.
Like I can't remember how much time exactly Ariel has to make Eric kiss her, but like everything happens.
It's not long.
No, everything happens in very quick succession after that.
Yeah.
So I'd argue that by marrying Eric or being engaged to Eric over that period of time, she's been given implicit permission to stay by a working royal.
I mean, he has the right to deport her at that point. Well,
make her walk back into the ocean.
Well, actually, to be fair, that's actually a bit questionable.
We're not obviously entirely sure how the political system works.
But the one of the kind of reasons that we weren't sure whether he would have the right to get rid of her is that it says in the journal Asylum Seekers, Good Faith in the State, which is a section of the International Journal on Minority and Group Rights, that it has come to be accepted that human beings with real protection needs should not be left with nowhere safe to go. And it's kind of stated that that's an accepted fact by many nations. So given that Ariel kind of had no safe place to go, both because of Ursula and the fact that it wasn't really safe for her to go back to the Kingdom of Atlantica.
This is kind of where we're having to make magic provisions again. Because technically, when we're looking at conditions to be an asylum seeker, we have a lot about persecution in terms of like nationality and ethnicity and race.
And while she's not being persecuted, she doesn't have the ability to go back there. She now has legs. She can't breathe underwater.
She doesn't have a tail anymore. So we're gonna add that sort of as a clause to the asylum seeker bill, because I feel like it's in keeping with the spirit of the law. I'd argue.
It talks about social, political, cultural, and religious aspects of the society that are reasons you can't go back. And I suppose a bit of a stretch, it could be argued that it's a social or cultural aspect, the fact that they do live underwater. Just at a stretch.
We have some debate about whether or not we're classing mermaids as like a nationality / ethnicity.
We spoke about that, but I think we kind of decided that we had to, for the sake of this podcast, we had to assume they were equal to humans in terms of the rights they have.
Sentience, rights, kind of thing.
But we had to acknowledge that they were different and that they don't have the same capabilities.
Because humans don't have tails and cannot live underwater. So what else have we got about asylum seekers? I think we have a bit more to say about that.
I mean, there's quite a lot of things to say. another reason that Ariel, we think, could stay in the country is that the Refugee Convention Article 2 says that every refugee has duties to the country in which he finds himself. And going back to the journal we've just discussed, they say that that refugees in applying for asylum have to engage with the state of destination, and that is in reference to the article I've just stated.
Yeah.
We were arguing that Ariel, in marrying the prince,
is engaging.
She's engaging in the state. Yeah, there's a wedding. There's people there.
She's a part of the a monarch in. She sort of ends up as like a monarch between, well, not a monarch, but a member of royalty between the human world and the
she's basically
mermaid kingdom.
Yeah.
So she's engaging the state.
Because not only is she a monarch, but she's creating relations between
she does, because they were very separate.
Yeah, they didn't know that Atlantica really existed.
Well, the humans didn't, but the mermaids are very much aware that humans existed.
The mermaids knew that humans existed, but not vice versa. And she opens up those relations.
I feel
she is contributing to the country.
I mean, I don't really remember the Little Mermaid. We didn't really consider Little Mermaid 2.
No.
In this one.
The same as with our Frozen one.
But I like trying to throw my mind back several years to remember the last time I watched it. I feel like there are definitely more in inverted commas international relations following the marriage. So she is doing a duty to the state. She is acting as a working monarch. I'd say. Well, not monarch. I keep saying monarch. Working royal.
Yeah. One other thing we considered was, would she be able to get spousal citizenship? And based on UK laws, we
looked very hard for this one.
Yeah, for some reason we really struggled to find this one.
But no, because she's under 18. Although the marriage, by our standards, is legal.
Yeah,
it's a legal marriage,
and because we kind of decided that her dad, the king, even if not in a physical contract, he verbally signed off on it.
Yeah, he magically signs off on it by being like giving her legs and telling her to like go for it, like go get him, go.
I feel like, given that we're in a fantasy world,
that's confirmation enough that he approves. Like the dad's given her legs and told her to go for it. I'd say that's pretty much.
I don't think there's anything else he could do. I don't think they could have got another contract in that film. I don't think any child would watch The Little Mermaid if there were 2 contracts discussed.
I mean, we would.
Yeah, we would have done. Any normal child.
I mean,
normal might not be the right phrase.
I think as of now we can argue that all aspiring law students can find, relevant content in Disney films, which is something I don't think anybody expected when they were a child and watching them, that they'd be coming back years later. No, I never really watched the
Disney films thinking about this. Did you?
Yeah. I think I'm going to be a Disney adult. It's quite sad.
Yeah. I mean, I watch the Disney films, not that often, but I'd never thought about legally binding well, the only time I thought about legally binding contract was in that impeccable song or statement or whatever it was from Ursula.
More recently. But do we have anything else to say to that? I mean, we digress.
Yes,
we digress. It is a podcast. We're not claiming to be a fact channel. I think we were talking about neither of them are reigning monarchs. No. Ariel is the youngest daughter of the king. Yeah. And it's sort of implied that since he's Prince Eric and not King Eric. I mean, after they get married, it's a bit fuzzy in terms of what their
we don't really
royal status is. But in terms of most of the film, there is implied there's someone else that's in charge. So
you might know that the monarch, like for example the King or Queen of England, doesn't need a visa to travel.
They don't need to hold a passport.
No.
Obviously Ariel didn't have any documents when she just walked out the sea.
Yeah. It's pretty safe to assume.
But we've decided that since neither of them are reigning monarchs,
I think that they would need
a visa to enter either place. But where we find difficulty is humans weren't aware that by travelling by sea they were travelling through international...
Yeah, they were trespassing.
Yeah, they were trespassing. So if anything, Prince Eric was the first illegal immigrant.
Yeah.
In terms of the film timeline.
Yeah.
By deciding to, like, all those people on the ships by deciding to sail across it.
There was another point we discussed about when Eric goes to fight Ursula, would he need a visa to go as what he's basically a soldier at that point to fight for their country. And there's some countries that basically have an SOFA agreement with the United Kingdom. Is that...
Yes.
Is that, yeah?
A status of forces agreement.
Yeah.
Usually, but there's no NATO.
Yeah,
so,
but...
in terms of how relevant that is, we don't know.
Yeah, but basically, obviously, Atlantis as a country doesn't have an SOFA agreement.
We're assuming.
Well, Atlantica doesn't. We're assuming it doesn't. So therefore, Eric was also technically trespassing
when he's
fighting for them. But if he did have a status of force agreement,
at that point he
wouldn't
technically fighting off a monarch.
Yeah.
Is that treason? We come, but there's a lot of treason in Disney films. It's what we're learning from this. Stay tuned for the one we have on The Lion King coming up.
There's a lot of treason there. Yeah. Another act of treason, when Ursula turns the king into a...
There's a contract there, though, and I'd argue that...
Yeah, but him in that state is still technically the king. She took the crown.
He signs away his right to be king, but my other thing is...
Does he?
It was pressured. He saves Ariel by sacrificing himself.
I suppose, yeah.
So, but my argument is that there's an element of pressure being put on him there.
Is she blackmailing the king?
I'd argue that it is.
I think she's blackmailing the king.
She is blackmailing the king. There's more treason. There's a lot of treason.
So much treason.
Basically, they're all illegal immigrants, and they're all committing treason. They're all potential illegal immigrants. Let's give ourselves like a safety net. Potential.
I feel like we should probably say, as we've said before, we don't really know what we're talking about. We have done the research, we've read the academic journals, we've read the legislation.
But it's a fantasy movie. It's a cartoon.
and more importantly, we don't have law degrees.
We can't be certain that they're illegal. We just, based on what we've researched and discussed, and
debated heavily with a large group of people that vastly disagree with most of our points that are undoubtedly a stretch.
They're a bit of a stretch, but I feel like because it's a piece of media...
Well, I feel like we can
stretch it out.
And I feel like we justify, to the best of our ability, we justify everything we say.
We do. I think there's some validity to be found there, but I don't... Honestly, it's not like we're hurting anyone by saying Ariel's an illegal immigrant. Like, I mean, we could go, really, get into, the Brothers Grimm fairy tale versions, and then we enter a whole new
socially
ballpark.
Sensitive. Yeah.
But I think...
Anything else to say?
No, that's all from me.
I think that's us done.
Yeah.
So yeah, in conclusion, Ariel is potentially not an illegal immigrant because she's probably an asylum seeker based off the fact that she'd been trafficked. Ursula committed treason.
Ursula's a pimp?
Yeah, Ursula's a pimp. Yeah. Eric is potentially
an illegal immigrant. I wouldn't say immigrant because he's not migrating.
He wasn't migrating.
A
trespasser.
More likely. So actually, we don't have any illegal immigrants.
No. Oh, was Ursula an illegal immigrant
that's too
the United Kingdom?
In the United Kingdom?
No, we're assuming that this it was set in Eric's kingdom. We're likening to the United Kingdom in terms of laws.
Yeah. I'd say no. Why I'm saying no, it's like...
Why did she have a right to be there?
She didn't.
She didn't. She wasn't escaping anything.
But she's...
I mean, people didn't like her, but she wasn't being kicked out.
She was enchanting people. I feel like that's a difficult...
Because
Ariel was there with the intention to stay.
Yeah.
That's one thing. That's why we could argue that Ariel's either an asylum seeker or an immigrant.
I'd argue that Ursula was intending to stay because she enchanted Prince Eric to marry him.
No, but I feel like that was just to thwart Ariel's chances of actually fulfilling her side of the deal. Because I think that I feel like it's pretty clear to me that her overall plan was to blackmail Trident and to take over Atlantica and also the human world. I feel like she didn't really have the intention to settle.
I see where you're coming from.
I say she's another trespasser.
Yeah.
And but then, like, she never actually goes through with the marriage to Eric, and we don't know if she ever would.
No.
That's
I feel like that's quite hard to judge.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have much more to say to that then.
No, neither do I.
Weird. So
yeah, I think that wraps this up.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of this episode.
A very odd episode, to say the least. A bit disjointed, perhaps.
We tried our best.
We tried our best.
We
read a lot, and I mean a lot.
But I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of Kyle and Ariel.
Yeah,
and we'll see you in the next one. Right. Bye, guys.
Bye.